again, fellow investigative interviewers. Welcome to another episode of The Practitioner. Today's session is about a few components within the opening phase of an interview, the part covering your introductions through to the prompt for an episodic narrative account. We sure like to make life difficult, don't we? Often getting caught up in the weeds instead of swimming freely in the open waters. We talk about games such as hockey in terms of complex rules and procedures, instead of having the simple goal of putting the puck in the opponent's net more often than they bang it into ours. It's no wonder we get stressed out at times. When I became a teacher, I vowed to keep life simple and explain investigative strategy in the easiest way possible. For example, I veered away from talking about hundreds of possible types of evidence and kept to the simplest format. There are only two types, physical and verbal. Yeah, there are many subcategories within each, but why complicate things? I applied the same approach to investigative interviewing by claiming an interview would require only one component, the opening instruction, if the goal were to obtain information with no concern for quality or quantity. The prompt: start at your beginning, wherever it's important to you, and tell me everything, should elicit information. Not as much as it could have, though, had it been given following an introductory or priming phase. If you want information that is relevant, complete, and reliable, the full goal of an interview, there are things you could do before that instruction. The investigative interview framework known as PEACE, P-E-A-C-E, has the engage and explain phase for this very reason. This phase, when done well, would lead to increased detail in the subsequent account clarify challenge phase, where we would excavate parts of the recalled narrative, the interviewee's agenda, and poke around for information not yet mentioned, but of investigative interest, the interviewer's agenda. The recall would have both breadth and depth. Today, we're going to look at why an engage and explain segment would lead to a higher yield of quality information, and then focus on several specific components in detail, mainly those that have an explanatory function. A few parts have been covered in earlier practitioner episodes, so we won't cover them again today. This means we won't speak to greetings, reciprocity, ground rules, establishing the reason for the interview, the teach to talk, or presenting legal warnings. We will cover explaining your role, goals and objectives, the investigative process, and the interview process. So why should we bother with an engage and explain phase at all? We'll keep this short and sweet. It's because many people who are interviewed are unfamiliar with the process and the person conducting the interview. Yes, that's you. Lack of familiarity often breeds fears from the uncertainty, and fear could lead to increased anxiety and decreased trust and faith in the interviewer and the process. In short, people tend to open up more to people they know, particularly when in an environment that gives them maximum control and autonomy. Now, if I were the king of the world, I would change the name of this phase from engage and explain to engage while explaining, because they occur simultaneously if done well. As mentioned earlier, if we only wanted basic information, we could get away with skipping the engage and explain phase. But the goal is to get as much relevant information as possible without sacrificing the reliability. Now we can move on to a few important parts of the process. Explaining your role. Although the interviewee would already know your name from the greeting phase, he may not know for whom you work. To him, you're still a stranger. For a police officer, even though you may be in uniform, take a few seconds to mention the name of your agency. If you are a detective, Mention the unit you are in, particularly if there could be doubt that you are indeed a police officer. For the non-police investigator, you may have to explain a bit more. You would still mention the company for whom you work, but you could also explain the relationship between your company and the one employing the interviewee. For example, I often give my company's name and follow that with the fact that we've been contracted by his employer to conduct the investigation in an impartial and unbiased manner. Explaining your goals and objectives. When explaining your goals, keep it simple. Just say your goal is to get information from him and you would like it to be high in quantity and quality. If you find it helpful, don't be afraid to make it simple by saying you want to know everything and no detail is too small. Now, don't go overboard here, as this will be made clear many times, for instance, during the teach to talk and the cognitive instruction. For the objectives, simply tell your witness that usually interviewees talk about people, locations, actions and conversations, times, and objects, and that you would like him to do that as well. Now, it wouldn't hurt to let him know that you encourage detail on other categories, such as thoughts and feelings, and even perceptions. Again, keep this simple or the message may get lost in the mix. Explaining the investigative process. For this part, you do not want to overwhelm the interviewee by talking for an hour. A brief outline of what you will be doing, as well as how decisions will be made and by whom, should suffice. For example, for a workplace matter, you could say, Dick, our conversation today is only part of the investigation. I'll be speaking to other people, including the respondent, so I can learn as much as possible. I'll also do my best to find other relevant evidence, perhaps physical evidence, to help me fully understand what happened. At the end of this investigation, I'll write a report for your company that will explain the results, including if any aspects of the complaint were supported on a balance of probabilities. Once the report has been forwarded, your company will decide what to do with the information in it. Now, it would rarely hurt to ask the interviewee if he has any questions on how the investigation works and to have a good discussion on any posed. This will build trust, which will help the rest of the interview. Explaining the interview process. It is often worthwhile to ask the interviewee if he has been interviewed before, as the response may help you decide how much explanation is needed. If he says he hasn't, then you may have to explain more than if he says he has. Here's a detailed explanation of what he should expect. Dick, seeing that you've never been interviewed for a situation like this, I'd like to take the time to let you know what will happen. At a certain point, I'll ask you to tell me everything about the situation that has brought us together. I'll stop talking and I'll listen intently to everything you say. And when I say listen, I mean to understand. I won't interrupt you and want you to keep talking until you have given me as much detail as possible. Now, Dick, I do not expect perfection, so just try your best. When you're done telling me about this, I'll look over my notes and probably ask for additional detail or clarification about what you have told me. I call that being professionally curious. For example, if you mention a person, I might ask you a few questions about that person. Does that make sense? Sure does. Do you have any questions on that part? Well, are you going to grill me if I make a mistake? Dick, if you say anything that doesn't make sense to me or confuses me, I will ask you to help me understand so I'm no longer confused. I will not grill you, but I will obviously ask you questions so I don't misrepresent what you do tell me. Does that make sense? Yeah, sure does. Far away. Well, folks, I think we've flogged this topic enough for today. Now, take some time to develop a checklist of engage and explain components. Practice it until it sounds less like a script and more like a conversation. Have fun and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we learn. So, cheers.